This is Dialogue Conspiracy, a perspective of events which directly affect world affairs. Your host, research specialist Mae Brussell.
Good afternoon. Hello. We'll be discussing a lot of subjects today. There's not enough time ever to cover the news of the week the way it's coming down, so I've sort of divided the weekly format into the things that are good in the news and the things that are bad in the news and the actions that we should be taking to follow up. And that's the best way I can see to analyze what's taking place. I do want to make a couple of announcements. I haven't usually done this on the program, but there was a request made to announce a fundraising for Harami Clinic, the clinic that's over in Seaside. Here in Monterey, it's in Seaside, California. The people up in Santa Cruz can come down. The ones in our local community can come to the theater on Broadway in Seaside. There's going to be a fundraising for the clinic. It's a medical clinic, and I'm going to be there next Sunday at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to speak and be with the group. They're having trouble raising rent and electricity and funding bills, and I'm going to speak to the Seaside community how the Watergate affects their own particular problems. There should be absolutely no need for people scrounging around for medical care in our society, and for people like Roy Ash and Howard Hughes and the racists and the people that hate the black community of America so much, getting the defense contracts and their cost overruns and scrounging around for medication and care of the sick and child care centers in our communities. It's disgraceful. And I'll be speaking to the group on the relationship of the Watergate scandal, people like Mr. Phillips from Young Americans for Freedom, and filled with American Nazis, German Nazis, tying up domestic funds, needs of our communities besides legal care, medical care, and let's get the Nazis out. Let's get some government in power. Let's not impeach Richard Nixon. Let's get him removed from office totally. And like I said last week in Washington, there were buttons that were worn at the press meeting, free the Watergate 500. Nicholas von Hoffman called them the 700. If we get 700 hardcore, right-wing, anti-communist, they go into the label anti-communist, hardcore Nazis out, there would be a chance for the minorities, the Chicanos, the blacks, the American Indians, and the poor whites in this country to get all the medical care and attention they need, instead of directing it into these ridiculous cost overruns of $8 billion just for new weapons. So there is a link between the people that are in power today who usurp the power and the way the money is held up for domestic needs, and everybody's hurting. So we'll talk about the Watergate. That's 3 o'clock next Sunday afternoon at the theater at the Broadway over in Seaside, California. A student of Dialogue Conspiracy, Mike Cochran, who's been listening to these shows for a year and a half, almost 2 years, and who has tapes of all of my KLRB shows, has applied at Monterey Peninsula College to give a course in the summer called, it's going to be on conspiracies and political assassinations. And the classes will be signing up in June. So that people that are interested in listening to cassettes of the old shows or seeing the movie, the Zapruder film, the shooting of President Kennedy in Dallas, or going into some of the research of the political assassinations that led to the ascendancy of Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew, and who are now falling down a slippery ladder, we hope, very deep down into the depths of disgrace. If you want to see the way they ascended and the way they're falling, you can sign up at the Free University, call the college, find out the dates, and take a course with Mike. And then I'm sure that members of the class can come out to my home some evening and examine my library of books on political assassinations or my cross-filing system, and see the cassettes to all the shows for the past 2 years, and you can borrow them maybe out of the course and take them home, some of these, and type them up or put them on your own cassette machine, and have a collection of your own, and begin to understand the history of the 1960s and 70s as being one of completely sabotaged by an illegal team. And Mike will help you, steer you through. He's been to Texas and visited with Penn Jones, a researcher, and been to Dealey Plaza, and we'll show the movies, and this is an educational experience. The way I talk to you is a course. I want you to learn and get the sources of information where you can continue to study your history. Remember, the White House was rewriting the history at the time the Watergate broke, and they were making it, Charles Colson told Howard Hunt, just make it a little better and make it pretty sure that Kennedy was responsible for DM's death. So being as they are writing our history, let's study what the history was from a lot of documents that they haven't tampered with yet, and find out how they got to the position in the White House that they were tampering with. And you'll get copies in the library at MPC of the Warren Commission hearings and current stuff on the Watergate. It should be a good course. And Thursday, May the 17th, there is a committee coming out here on the peninsula to help prisoners. I don't have the name of the room. It'll probably be at MPC, but look in the local paper. A gentleman by the name of Lloyd White from Santa Cruz is coming down here to help prisoners. And the prisoner situation is something that I'm very close to in my studies of political conspiracies and assassinations. You have to remember that when Hitler's name is mentioned, it's synonymous with Dachau and Auschwitz. And you don't just kill John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King, remove men without destroying a whole system. And in our prison system is the epitome of the fascist state. It exists right now with the Department of Corrections in California or the New York prisons or all over the country. And in these prisons are many innocent people who are the victims of these conspiracies. The people out on the streets, many are the criminals, and inside the prisons are the guilty. And I have this Prisoners of America where I'm trying to get people to get prisoners to wear bracelets with the prisoner's name and the date that they got into prison. I wear a bracelet with the name of Hugo Pinell on it. And I have a correspondence of people getting bracelets for them to become familiar with particular prisoners and write to them and find out how they were put in jail. And you'll be shocked how many of them are innocent and want their story told and can't get out. A famous man, he's not famous yet, but it's a disgrace, a particular prisoner, apropos of what I'm saying, surfaced in the news, but not very much. He's still silent, pretty quiet. His name is Elmer Davis. And in 1971, Elmer Davis was charged with committing a burglary at the office where they took Daniel Ellsberg's papers. And this particular man was a convict who was arrested August 26, 1971, and was not released from jail until September the 5th, 1971. And the burglary took place September the 3rd or 4th on the Labor Day weekend. Now, this particular man was incarcerated at the time of the break-in, and he is put down on the jail records in the California conspiracy section. I'm sure it's part of their plans. He was the chief of police of Beverly Hills, B.L. Cork, said this week that the evidence completely exonerated Elmer Davis, that he was charged while he was in jail for breaking into to the doctor's offices that took Daniel Ellsberg's papers. But this is the point I want to make very, very clear. It isn't enough to say that Elmer Davis is exonerated of the charge. The question is, who switched the records around? We know that the CIA works with the criminal conspiracy section in Los Angeles. Louis Tackwood has made the allegations. We know it works with the entire intelligence system up and down the state of California. The point isn't that Mr. Davis is exonerated. The point is, how did he get charged in the first place for doing the burglary while he was still in jail, and how many other innocent men are in jail on charges while the robbers or the murderers are on the outside? Now, I know about 12 that I could list right offhand who are innocent in jail, and the people who committed the crimes are on the outside. I received a letter from a prisoner up in California. He's at San Quentin right now. His name is Jerry Lund. He was put in on, he's charged with one framed charge, and while he was in jail on a rap that they tried to make him guilty for doing a crime he did not commit, they framed him for another robbery and assault while he was still in jail. And I have the record, I have his letter, and I have the records at home, and you say, well, May, that's impossible. There's no police department that's going to charge a man for an assault and put on his record when he's locked up in San Quentin. But here you have the case of Elmer Davis with the Ellsberg thing, and the Beverly Hills police putting him down as guilty for breaking into this apartment. That has to mean that the Beverly Hills Police Department works with the CIA to clean up their books. It can't mean anything else. Now, Mr. Davis has said that he was innocent of these charges and that he was forced to sign these papers, that he was told that he'd get a better deal, that they'd let him out of jail. He was told that he would only be prosecuted for a petty theft if he would cooperate, and he sent a letter, October the 7th, 1971. He sent a letter, November the 12th, 1971, and complained to the police captain in Beverly Hills and said he was offered a deal to cop out on a lot of numerous burglaries, including the one at Dr. Fielding's office, and he'd only be charged with petty theft if he would cooperate. So you have to ask yourself, why does the chief of police of Beverly Hills, California, get a man off on these charges and let him cop out in order to get somebody else off the rap? That means that somebody's robbing stores and offices in Beverly Hills, and they are protecting the robber. The chief of police is protecting the robber, and the person they're protecting is employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. So you don't have to worry much further about what is happening in these prisons. Believe me, take a prisoner, make a friend, and write, and back up what I'm saying, because I'm going to be moving my research from the Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, those kinds of assassinations, into the prison system, into Watergate West, I call it shortly, with my next article. I'll be moving to Mr. Evel Younger, the Attorney General of California, Chief of Police Davis, and Sheriff Peter Pitches in Los Angeles. We're going to move Watergate West right in the Department of Corrections. So if you can, look in the paper Thursday night, because this is only Monday, find Lloyd White of Santa Cruz. He'll be in Monterey. Take a prisoner. He'll give you the names of men. Sign up. Be familiar with their charges. And let's see how far this system of infiltrating the prison system and imprisoning innocent men really goes. Pick up a friend and become familiar with his case, and see that Watergate affects your local community and your local prisons. And it goes beyond Ehrlichman and Haldeman and the really big crooks. The innocent people are locked up. Last week we played a tape cassette about Spiro Agnew being funded by the Greek military junta, pouring money into this country if Richard Nixon would take Agnew as his vice president. That was last Monday, and the news this week, there was an article in the paper since we talked last week that Donald Nixon denied this last Thursday that Mario Corporation, this is a Greek, it's an American corporation, but it's also has a large Greek holdings. He denied that the Mario Corporation gave him a $10 million loan from the Greek government because he was President Nixon's brother. The article goes on to say the young Nixon, who's vice president for the industry and community relations for Mario, denied knowledge or responsibility of the loan. Well, we know what the denial of this team means. The denial means absolutely nothing. And if any of you saw the show on television Sunday night, the 60-minute show of the denial of famous men, Maurice Stans and not Joe Magruder, but John Mitchell and Patrick Ray, and then it showed how the truth unfolded. It's very interesting that Nixon, the president's brother, just made 2 recent trips to Greece where he's supposed to have come home with $10 million, and this would help pay some of the defense money as the other sources of funds come out, because Donald Nixon is also named in the Vesco case as being the man who asked whether they wanted their payment of $200,000 to the committee in cash, in $100 bills, or check. It's interesting that $10 million loan, in quotes, is coming to Greece at a time when Spiro Agnew is being propped up by the Greek military junta and could be a president if the president's impeached. This is one reason we don't want impeachment proceedings. We want to get them all removed totally and cleaned out. There's 3 books that just came out in the last month, and one came out this week. If you can afford them, buy them. If you can't, go to the library and get them. One is David Weiss, called The Politics of Lying: Government, Deception, Secrecy, and Power. And I understand he talks about Mr. Ehrlichman and Haldeman. When I was doing a lot of work on the political assassinations, and people would say to me, what's a good book to read, like Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment, or what book should we read to understand political assassinations? I would say read David Weiss's book, The Invisible Government, because if you don't understand the 2 governments exist side by side, one that should be elected and one that is that clandestine government that took over after Kennedy was killed, if you don't understand that, you can't understand anything about the bullets or the bullet trajectory at Dealey Plaza. You don't understand conspiracies if you don't understand the invisible government. So David Weiss now has a book called The Politics of Lying, and it certainly seems that it's coming out at the right time. Another book is The Secret Team, This is Fletcher Prouty, who mentions in his book about being in the Soviet Union with, not in the Soviet Union, he was in Great Britain and met with Allen Dulles and James McCord. And it's about the CIA and its allies and its control of the United States and the world. It's called The Secret Team. Fletcher Prouty is a member of the Committee to Investigate Assassinations. He was a liaison of the Pentagon over in England with the CIA, and he is beginning to talk about his experiences and how our government became corrupted. Another book to read is The Most Secret Police Force in America. It describes him called The State Trooper. It's a novel, but it isn't a novel. It's like The Rope Dancer that Marchetti did. It's about the state trooper who's supposed to be stopping speeding motorists, that they are the most secret police. We know they are. They pick up a phone when they stop you on the road and say you're either going too fast or you're too slow. They call up Sacramento and they get a complete dossier on every single thing you've ever done within 1.5 minutes. This is your State Trooper. It's a novel by Noel Gerson. You can get these at the library. They're new, or buy them if you can. What was good this week in the news? Well, the Congress impounded the funds for Vietnam. They cut off the money for the war in North Vietnam, and they cut off the veto, the highways and water purifications that Nixon had tied up. Congress does not let Nixon get away with that. They're going to tie up. Richard Nixon wants to tie up the money, and they're returning it back to Congress for the water purifications, which is more important than the highways. One of the good things in the news this week, Richard Nixon is giving up his idea of the super cabinet. In the article I wrote in the Realist last July on why was Martha Mitchell kidnapped, I said 1972 was the most important year in American history because Richard Nixon was going to do away with the traditional cabinet, and he'd do away with the Constitution. The cabinet was a super war cabinet that was to be placed in the White House with Roy Ashe, Fred Malek, and John Ehrlichman to take all federal money and budget and put it into the White House like the National Security Council and determine the good people get the money, the bad people don't, and starve off the natives, keep the defense contracts up, and we'll run the country ourselves. We don't need the Congress. Well, this week, Richard Nixon, a good member of a group of his super cabinet, are going off to jail, I hope. So the cabinet had to be reduced, and the president has killed the idea of the super cabinet. That was in the Los Angeles Times this week, not an AP wire, but he's not going to use the super cabinet. The article said the governing will be more with the Congress and with the people of the United States. I'm quoting the article, the cabinet will meet more frequently and play a bigger role than Mr. Nixon promised, particularly in dealing between the administration and Congress. There will be more attempts to sit down and explain to Congress what we're doing as a cabinet, which is about time. And they will resolve their differences, and they will not have a tight domestic council. They're going to have to be forced to do away with it. The article said there will be fewer bright-faced 23-year-olds around who think they can do no wrong. So this was quite a victory. Then the article goes on to say that Richard Nixon was in a very bad way before he went to Florida last weekend. He really needed that Florida trip last weekend. Last week was bad in the White House. And then it goes on to say that he returned back to Washington where he met with John Connally, and that was where we go into the bad news. The good news is that the super cabinet is over with. I hope the idea to drop our old Constitution is over with, and that's the good news of the week. The other good news is that the return of heroes in America that I've talked about so often at different times on the shows, the heroes that I referred to up to this point were the provocateurs who had turned against their own people, against us, who had come clear and wanted to set this country straight. Those men were Louis Tackwood, who worked for the LA Police Department, Frank Martinez, the Chicano, who worked for the Los Angeles Police Department and Sheriff's Department, with the Chicano group, Larry Shears, who told about the Treasury Department wanting to kill Eldridge Cleaver, and Cesar Chavez, Victor Marchetti of the CIA, who left there and began to write these books to expose them, and then Ellsberg and Russo leaving the Pentagon. Those were the heroes of the last year, but now we have Judge Sirica and we have James McCord. Sirica is saying on the bench, you treat me like a nincompoop. I think you're all lying. He couldn't stand the way the federal government prosecuted the case. James McCord handing a note to the judge saying the Criminal Justice Department is all wrong. It's a disgrace. I don't trust the FBI. I don't trust the grand juries. Then the Washington Post, who fought this thing all alone, is being praised, won the Pulitzer Prize this week. And the editorial of the Chronicle just today, the Judge Matthew Byrne is a hero. They said, in quotes, he earned the esteem of lawyers and laymen alike, and capped his performance by dismissing all charges of the Pentagon paper. Here was a man who was offered all the goodies that our society has or think they have. They think they're goodies, like being the head of the FBI. It's such a real privilege. A bunch of criminals are running that place and hiding evidence of conspiracies and assassinations. They were going to give him the honor, but a lot of men think it's still an honor. And meeting with the president, he met with President Nixon. It didn't go to his head. He had 2 meetings with Ehrlichman. He met the great Kissinger, and he turned it all down. And what happened? He has earned the esteem, the editorial say, of lawyers and laymen alike. So what you have is Judge Sirica and Judge Matthew Byrne turning their back upon the people who appoint them, the people who pay them, knowing that those are single individuals as against 200 people, 200 million in this nation, and asking for truth and showing how revolted they are by the lawyers and the people that are hiding the truth. So we do have what good in the news this week is the return to heroes. The heroes of the 60s and 70s were all murdered. The civil rights leaders, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and Reuben Solis are all slain, But now maybe the heroes that are going to turn the truth back will be recognized for what they are, and society needs them. We don't need Haldeman and Ehrlichman and Barbosa and Nixon. You can't look up to these people. When you pledge allegiance, you almost have to laugh, and it's time that we had something to look forward to, Now, things aren't really very good. I think it's the worst week. Now that I've told you how good it is, I'm going to tell you how bad it is. I think we're on the brink of a martial law, and I think you have to be very, very careful. Last week we talked about the resistance. I talked to you about what's happening in Washington this week, and I assume that there may not even be a next week that we're on the air. We take it 1 week at a time at this point, because the people behind Richard Nixon, the huge oil companies, the gasoline, the steel, the aluminum, all the minerals, the resources, ITT, General Motors, the communications, Howard Hughes, the satellites, they don't give up that easily. They just cannot give up. They've entrenched themselves so much in this system for 25 years that it's hard to believe that a single congressional committee could stop them. Now, Richard Nixon got on and gave a saccharine, sweet speech to the nation that nobody believed. And good reason nobody believed it. But the point is this. He came out this week and said, I'm going to continue the raids on Cambodia. He was very open about it. The Gallup poll showed 2-1 that the American people do not want the raids in Southeast Asia. They don't want to be involved. They don't want the bombing. The president said, I will continue them. That is a policy. We feel it's the right policy, which is just like telling you, I don't care if I can't rig my polls and the polls are against me, I'm going to have my war in Asia. There's still a lot of heroin over there. There's a lot of minerals. There's oil finds. There's ammunition contracts. We're dropping, this is American imperialism, dropping all our bombs and airplanes and new planes and new weapons, and you have to have a war to keep manufacturing that stuff. And all of his friends in the Southwest, in Florida, from California, the whole Southwest, are not going to give up the contracts for making war. So for right or wrong, the people don't want it. This is tantamount to a dictator who comes out and says, I'm going to continue anyway. And if you don't give me the funds, I'm going to get them anyway. Those statements came out of the White House this week. You can check them out. We also have a situation in the White House we had last week with Mr. Haig guarding the door. General Haig, who climbed over 243 other Army officers to get the prestigious position of telling us who goes to see the president and who doesn't. It is a grim reminder that we are in a military state right now. Mr. Haig is guarding the White House door. Worse than that, Mr. Peterson is still in the Justice Department. He was the man who said we'd never know in our lifetime what would happen at the Watergate, or this was going to be a complete investigation. He belongs out, just the same as Mr. Kleindienst. There's no reason for Peterson, or Patrick Gray is out. I don't know why Peterson's still there. He has no business there. He should be out fast. He's still entrenched. The CIA got a new head this week at a time when we're talking about espionage agents, secret funding, secret money, money washing. Mr. Colby became the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mr. Egan Colby, whose prestigious position is that he managed to overthrow about 60 other governments before ours. He is the whole head of the black covert clandestine operations of the Central Intelligence Agency. So you have Roy Ashe sitting on the domestic council still with Fred Malek. He hasn't budged at all this week. Litton Industries overthrew Greece. You have Mr. Colby of the Covert Department. It is such an insult, besides escalating Cambodia and having Haig in the White House, to have Colby, the head of the CIA, be promoted. The man who's known in putting in military junta and overthrowing government and every sneaky, dirty trick that's devised by the Central Intelligence Agency becomes the head of the Central Intelligence Agency when you're investigating the department that supplies the wigs, the safe houses, the special ID cards, and all the documents, the typewriters, and all the documents for trickery and conniving that altered our elections all these years. It's his department that did it, and he's appointed the head of the CIA, and nobody's outraged yet. I take 8 papers a day, and I haven't heard anybody say, what are Haig and Colby doing here? This is what the investigation's about, and they're taking over. Then the head lawyer for the CIA is John Mowry. He was in charge of the American CIA over in Greece at the time that the military takeover took place. He is the head lawyer for the CIA and defended the use of the Central Intelligence Agency in the police departments of the United States. There was a hearing just about 2 months ago at Congress. A lot of congressmen this week are very incensed that the CIA is acting in domestic policy, and I don't know where they were 2 months ago when this particular lawyer, John Mowry from the Central Intelligence Agency, was bragging about his use of training policemen and Central Intelligence Agency tactics and wiretapping and bugging, and I'm sure they supply all these aliases and things in the local police departments too. I know they do. So you still have these men firmly entrenched. You have Mr. Haig guarding the door. You have Egan Colby, the head of the CIA. You have John Mowry as the head lawyer for the CIA. You have Roy Ashe and Litton Industries running still the Office of Management Budget. He hasn't been confirmed yet. He should be out. You should be writing letters to the Senate saying this isn't good enough for us. And then James Schlesinger is moved to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has announced they want more control over domestic affairs. So you really have a total military takeover, and while it's very exciting to find out that the desk of John Ehrlichman holds the important FBI papers that they wanted for the Ellsberg trial, they could just stay on a moment's notice. So what? What do you think? You know, this is a military takeover. We could create a crisis with the gasoline stations being closed. I understand that we're going to have a fuel shortage. They're stopping our gasoline. This would be another tactic like they used in Greece to overthrow Greece. Your mobility will be used up and your cars will not move from one place to the other. Any of these things can be happening in the next week or so. I don't believe that Mr. Nixon is going to get against a wall. He only represents a group of people that will use the excuse of national security, that we've gone too far. It's national security now that we stop all this talk. Some of Howard Hunt's testimony before the committee in Washington has been declassified before the grand jury. His testimony of May the 2nd. I could spend a whole 45 minutes just reading it to you. I wish I could. I'm just going to read you one section because we're talking about an illegal government and the overthrow and how Mr. Colby and these men are in power. This is part of the testimony that he was asked. The question was, were you aware or did you participate in any other what might commonly be referred to as illegal activities? And Howard Hunt said, illegal? With a question mark. Yes, sir. Answer, I have no recollection of any. No, sir. Question, what about clandestine activities? He says, yes, sir. Question, all right, what about that? And Howard Hunt said, well, I'm not quibbling, but there's a difference between something that's illegal and something that's clandestine. Question, well, in your terminology, would the entry into Dr. Fielding's office, these were for the Ellsberg papers, have been clandestine, illegal, neither one, or both? And Howard Hunt said, well, I would simply call it an entry operation conducted under the auspices of competent authority. Now, if that isn't a military dictatorship that we're in now, you tell me what it is. The answer the question was to Howard Hunt, was you're entering a doctor's office and taking medical records of a private citizen, illegal, clandestine? How do you consider it? He said, I simply call it an entry operation conducted under the auspices of competent authority, meaning Richard Nixon, the President of the United States. That's who ordered it. That's who he was working for. You can give it any name you want. That's all it is. And Richard Nixon said, I want to get to the bottom of this. We're moving along pretty fast, but there's so much to cover. He said to us in television, otherwise I want to get to the bottom of this. He's going to stay at the bottom. He's not going to go any higher. It's up to us to move it where we want it to go. It's at the bottom now. The suggestion was made last week as an investigator. They used Lawrence Walsh as his name came up as an investigator into the Watergate affair. Lawrence Walsh was a deputy attorney general under Eisenhower, but he's also legal counsel to ITT. How ridiculous can you go? They're going around in circles. They can't come up with any new name that isn't involved in their own espionage activities. Because Mullen Associates, which is the public relations firm across the street from the White House, represents Howard Hughes and ITT. Howard Hunt worked for Mullen Associates. He worked for ITT. The Justice Department, John Mitchell and Mr. Peterson, the Assistant Attorney General, all favored ITT in their hearings. And the question of whether to break them up last year, they were favoring ITT. And they want the attorney for ITT to investigate the Watergate espionage. It's really an insult to intelligence, to be thrown this kind of stuff. And I wonder how long we have to rise up and remove them bodily from office or keep taking these ridiculous suggestions. Another point was that John Connally was brought back. He doesn't divest himself of any of his holdings while he's in the White House now. He gives advice on anything the president wants. That means domestic problems, foreign problems. He's back, not paid by the White House. Fred LaRue, who's going to be indicted in the Watergate affair, was never on the payroll of the White House. He was there for 3 years as a liaison of John Mitchell to the Justice Department. He's a multimillionaire and oilman who just wandered in and out of the White House and provided weapons for Mr. Baldwin. He escorted Martha Mitchell on a trip. These people have carte blanche to the White House. John Connally was the lawyer for Gulf Resources and Chemical Corporation that contributed part of the $89,000 that was found in Bernard Barker's pocket when he was arrested at the Watergate Hotel. So John Connally is back helping getting to the bottom of this particular case. Connally's name was also mentioned this week. John Dean mentioned John Connally and Spiro Agnew and the use of Agnew's telephone to settle ITT accounts and settle things with the Security Exchange Commission. John Connally at this point should be be investigated of his role in the entire operation, and yet he's in there deciding who will investigate the operation. There's something that has to do with political assassinations and repressions that I do want to cover this week that has nothing to do with the Watergate and has everything to do with the Watergate. Because when you're talking about a team that has overthrown the government that can get tighter, it's important to keep track of all the little methods they have of holding control. We're talking about who now, like Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Dean, McGregor, and the group back there, McGregor. But what are some of the things they do? Well, the New York Times had an article this week. The name of the lead article was "The Army is Shaping Scanners and Other Devices to Foil Assassins." Well, I like to see what the Army is cooking up, and I like to see how you foil assassins because I know where the assassins come from. And the excuse of all the political assassinations is always to get more repressions. The Army comes up with more budgets like the LEAA and all the lobotomies and all the helicopters in the police department were all funded after the assassination of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King. They take these particular murders that are planned by the Justice Department and by people high up in Washington, and then because the murders take place, they get new weapons to control the next assassination. Well, a new equipment research center down in Fort Belvoir in Virginia. It's an Army program, and this is what they're studying: Mobility Equipment Research and Development Center. And this is to find assassins, believe it or not. And they're going to use bacteria, whippet dogs, advanced infrared scanners, and psychological stress analyzers. Now, this article is going in. The University of Kentucky in May is going to have a conference. Now, dig this. This is to get assassins, would-be assassins. The conference is on electronic crime countermeasures. And here are some of the measures they've developed. The equipment is already perfected. It's in its advanced stages of development. You can look up the article. It's New York Times, May the 7th, 1973, if you want to go to the library and look it up. The equipment now is perfected. It's in its stages of development. And the conference in Kentucky is going to talk about the electronic crime countermeasures. The first measure they're going to use is called a stress analyzer. Now, this is the identification of potential assassins. You go around crowded rooms, and your Secret Service or other plainclothesmen go around, and they ask questions, harmless questions to individuals in the crowd, and the reply automatically analyzes their stress levels to the point where their stress is separated from personal worry to whether they're committed to violence. Now, if a person feels he's going to be assaulted, he can show violence in self-defense. If he feels a man is coming upon him and you sense a person in the crowd that's there to hurt you, you can really hit back in self-defense. But this little gadget is worn and is to be worn in public rooms. It goes along with the scanner that they use at the airports now, and it's for political meetings and rallies and other places. It's a stress analyzer that will supplement other equipment at airports to detect weapons and in jails, and certain agents and plainclothesmen are going to wear what they call stress analyzers. Now, another equipment they have are hidden x-rays that are going to be installed in the White House and other government buildings, and that gives the Secret Service men an instant and complete body picture of any person passing in these buildings or in the installations. These are hidden x-rays installed in government buildings, and they get an instant and complete body picture. The stress analyzer and the hidden x-rays. Another thing they have perfected is the use of animals. Miniature dogs, small ones, spayed whippets, and greyhound bitches are their most successful. And people, plainclothesmen, men, women, going through the crowd are going to carry these dogs on leashes. And the dogs have been taught to detect guns and various smells and powder and residue, and they don't excite suspicion. And you'll see a lot of dogs at rock concerts and political rallies on these leashes. I'm pretty certain, just like the Vietnamese caught on to some of these gadgets, that people are going to really get suspicious when they see all these dogs walking around. So these miniature dogs are being prepared. When you see a whippet or a greyhound, and somebody's innocently walking by, it's going to be pretty funny how many people, if they really catch on to this, can detect them. Now, there's going to be miniature metal detectors worn by plainclothesmen, and they're similar to hearing aids. They have tiny radio receivers, and they be carried in their briefcase, and they'll give out beeps if they see somebody suspicious. These radio receivers will tell you, based upon what people are carrying, if there's anything suspicious on them. Then they have a bioluminescent bacteria. And this gives a glow that will give off in the presence of certain gases, of certain explosives, and it'll be carried in the walls of agents and plainclothesmen, and this bacteria will react to gun oil and powder, and a glow will take place. This luminescent bacteria has been perfected. The infrared detector is going to be stationed at political meetings up on stands. You can imagine all this must cost about 10 or 20 million to detect assassins. All of these past assassins came from one side of the political spectrum or were funded by the same people. But based upon past political assassinations, this is a good way to get all these weapon detector things ready, so when you have martial law or have a police gate, you can locate the counterintelligence or the forces striking back. These detectors are going to be stationed within 50 feet of rostrums and platforms and all outdoor meetings to scan the crowd. And it says it wouldn't stop a political assassin like Lee Harvey Oswald, who's in a building, but immediately you could flow a light on any building and see where a gun was fired. Well, this was a very good way. It also programs you, the New York Times article, to let you know that Lee Harvey Oswald shot a gun from the Texas Book Depository, which he didn't have, and he never owned a rifle, but they reinforced the history that Oswald shot from there. But you also could have an alleged assassin up in a building and have a gun go off, just like another gun did go off from the area of the depository that Oswald was in. But the gunmen on the grassy knoll and from the Dow Tex building were airlifted out of town and never were found. So you could have a man, shooting a gun or be a patsy at this particular place, put your scanner up there and say, we caught him. The infrared gun flash is going to catch these people up at buildings. So there's going to be a convention in Kentucky, and I have many, many articles on electronic repressions that are coming out. This system isn't ready to stop yet just because they were arrested at the Watergate. I only bring this out as one article this week because they're far from being stopped. I also want you to write Senator Beilenson, Anthony Beilenson, Beilenson, Chairman of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, State Capitol, Sacramento. Keep telling him you don't want the school, that institute, to study the causes of violence down at UCLA. I talked about it on one of the programs. There's a good chance of that committee being shelved now. That's another repressive way to experiment with minority children and minorities and Indians and blacks in the Los Angeles area, do lobotomies on prisoners, and do a lot of medical experimentations. It is funded by the Criminal Justice Department, the same one that's under investigation right now. And Mr. Fisk of the Los Angeles Police Department is one of the consultants. When the Los Angeles Police Department is going to be linked into the criminal conspiracies, it's a very dangerous group. Dr. Jolly West thought he had a sure thing in getting this funded. CIA funds and foundations backing him up in case the state money doesn't come through or the federal money. Write to Senator Anthony Beilenson and tell him to stop the institute to study violence, the causes of violence, down at UCLA. They're going to work medical experiments on people, not sociological studies like the lack of funds coming in to the minority people. Now, the question of Mr. Dean, John Dean, surfacing again this week. He's being discredited by the news media. The congressmen say he really hasn't got enough to impeach Nixon, and some say he has. Follow what he's saying. He says they're attempting to limit my testimony. They're trying to prevent me from testifying. They want to keep the relevant information from the records. The prosecution is influencing the handling of my testimony. These are important charges because I spent 9 years cross-filing the Warren Commission hearings, 552 witnesses, and what I saw was that the important witnesses were never called. Someday I'd like to write a book called Witnesses Never Called. So when Dean tells you that the prosecution is influencing the handling of his testimony, that means they're going soft on questions. He said they're restricting the scope of his testimony. That means they're limiting it to a very narrow section. I've studied the way the federal government investigates itself and prosecutes itself. They limit the scope of the testimony, like when Jack Ruby's trial came up, and they asked the Warren Commission, will his trial affect, I mentioned this once before on the show, will his trial affect your findings of the Warren Commission? And Lee J. Rankin, the attorney for the Warren Commission, the head attorney, wrote back and said, no, but just limit it to whether or not he shot Oswald in the police department, not whether he knew Oswald. That's what you call a limited investigation into a trial. I could give you many, many cases of that. But when Dean is saying this, John Dean is saying these things today, they are identical to the investigation of who killed Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, or John Kennedy, or Malcolm X. And I include Malcolm X in all of these. It is a limited investigation still. The relevant information won't come out unless you want it to, and the best way is to get the whole prosecuting team out. They're having trouble finding an honest man in Washington who'll prosecute the thing, because if he gets his hands on the truth, there'll be about a few hundred people will be out of a job in 24 hours. So they're playing around. It is a nip and tuck. Are they going to have their martial law, or can they proceed in an orderly way? Well, our time is running out. I always bring enough stuff. I wish we could go for 2 or 3 or 4 hours each week, but we can't. We have to give the time back to KLRB. They're very generous to let us talk about this. It's 2 years this month that we've been doing Dialogue Conspiracy, and we started with the Pentagon Papers and the killing of John Kennedy. We're right about there. So let's hope we're on the air next week with no military junta, and read your news, and I'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Dialogue Conspiracy, featuring research specialist Mae Brussell. Well, as Mae says, if all goes well, she'll be back next week, same time.